2 a.m., a yellow backhoe on Elderwood Lane. One cut. The water main feeding Whitmore Community Hospital. Severed. Inside, IV pumps flash red. Dialysis machines shriek. Nurses sprint down dark hallways. Patients sit up in their beds, tubes still in their arms, no one telling them anything yet. My wife is one of those nurses. My pager goes off at 2:52 a.m. Water pressure critical, 41% and dropping. 4 minutes later, I'm standing over that trench. Fresh dirt. Clean cut. Not an accident. My phone rings. Marceline Pruitt, HOA board president, Elderwood Lane. The woman who ordered this, paid for it with the neighborhood's own dues money. "It's just a pipe," she says. She hung up. I stood there in the August dark, diesel still in the air, dirt on my boots, and made her one promise she couldn't hear. She would spend the rest of the year paying for that call. What would you have done? Drop it below. And where are you watching from tonight? My name is Donovan Reese, and for 11 years I've served as the Facilities and Operations Director at Whitmore Community Hospital, a 140-bed regional medical center tucked into the western edge of Crestfield Falls, Ohio. It's not a glamorous job title. It doesn't come with a corner office or a car allowance, but it comes with something better: the knowledge that every pipe I maintain, every generator I test, every safety protocol I audit, keeps real human beings alive. My wife, Tabitha, is a pediatric nurse on the 3rd floor. We met during a fire drill in 2009. She was holding a clipboard and a bag of saline. I was holding a wrench and a very bad map of the HVAC system. Some romances start with candlelight. Ours started with the smell of industrial lubricant and the screeching of an untested emergency alarm. We've been together ever since. We live about 6 blocks from the hospital in a modest craftsman bungalow on Elderwood Lane, right inside the Whitmore Terrace Homeowners Association. Mature oak trees line the street. The creak of those branches in a summer storm is one of my favorite sounds on earth. The neighbors keep their lawns trimmed and their porches swept. And for most of my time there, the HOA was about as exciting as a quarterly newsletter reminding you to power wash your gutters. Then Marceline Pruitt moved in. Marceline arrived 3 years ago with a U-Haul and an energy that I can only describe as someone who had been told no exactly once too many times in her career and decided to take out the balance on an entire zip code. She was retired. She'd been a mid-level compliance officer at a regional insurance company, and she apparently missed having power over things she didn't own. Within 8 months of moving in, she had campaigned for, won, and consolidated the HOA board presidency, the architectural review committee chair, and the neighborhood watch coordinator role into one person, herself. The first thing she did was fine the Okafor family at number 14 for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. The second thing she did was issue 3 noise complaints against the Delacroix couple at number 22 for hosting a birthday party that ended at 9:15 p.m. The third thing she did, and this is where I entered the picture, was send me a certified letter claiming that the hospital's service road access gate, which sits on an easement strip technically within HOA jurisdiction, was aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards and needed to be replaced at my personal expense within 30 days. I should clarify, I don't own the gate. The hospital owns the gate, but the easement strip runs along the edge of my property, and Marceline had apparently decided that proximity equals liability. Her certified letter cited 3 different HOA bylaws, 2 of which she had amended herself 6 weeks prior. I sent a polite response on hospital letterhead, explaining the ownership situation and attaching the recorded easement document. Marceline responded with a second letter, this one addressed directly to my home, telling me that my failure to cooperate would result in escalating enforcement actions. The smell of that second letter, fresh laser printer toner, the faint chemical bite of new paper, is something I still associate with the particular feeling of a fight you didn't ask for, but are absolutely going to finish. I didn't know then just how big the finish would be. Marceline's first real swing came on a Thursday morning in early spring, and it came dressed up as paperwork. I arrived at the hospital just after 7 a.m. to find a bright orange notice stapled to the service gate, the kind printed on cardstock that's designed to look vaguely official without actually being issued by any government body. Notice of non-compliance, HOA Resolution 22-17, aesthetic remediation required. Below that, in Marceline's own handwriting, fine accumulating at $50 per day, effective immediately. Now, I want you to understand what that gate looks like. It's a galvanized steel swing gate with a keypad entry, hospital standard, repainted gray 18 months ago during a routine maintenance cycle. It is, by any objective measure, completely unremarkable. It is the physical embodiment of neutral. But to Marceline Pruitt, it was a personal offense. I photographed the notice, removed it, because you can't legally post compliance orders on property you don't own, and called our hospital's legal counsel, a sharp woman named Beverlyn Cho, who had the institutional patience of a glacier and the professional ferocity of something considerably faster. She sent a brief, polished cease and desist to the HOA within 48 hours. The gate is hospital property on a recorded utility and access easement. HOA aesthetic jurisdiction does not extend to it. Cease all enforcement actions. Marceline's response was to hold an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but Tabitha was. She's technically the co-owner of our residence and therefore a dues-paying HOA member, and she sat in that meeting with her arms folded and her face composed in the particular expression she uses when a parent is refusing to believe their child needs stitches: patient, professional, and privately horrified. Marceline stood at the head of a folding table in the Whitmore Terrace community room, the air thick with the ghost of every potluck dinner that had ever been held there, old coffee and something vaguely floral, and announced that the hospital's access gate had created a security risk corridor that was bringing commercial traffic through a residential zone. She introduced a new resolution, HOA Resolution 23-04, that would authorize the association to petition the county to review and potentially revoke the access easement. This was not a small move. That easement had been in place since 1987, predating every single home in Whitmore Terrace. Revoking it would have forced hospital supply trucks, maintenance vehicles, and emergency contractors to reroute through the main residential street, adding significant response time and creating genuine safety risks. Tabitha raised her hand during the comment period and pointed this out calmly. She also mentioned in passing that the hospital employed 47 residents of Whitmore Terrace, including herself. Resolution 23-04 passed 4 votes to 3. Marceline had packed the meeting with 2 new committee appointees who had been members for less than 60 days. Here's the thing about HOA resolutions that target recorded utility easements. They don't go anywhere without county approval, and county approval requires a formal petition, a public comment period, a planning commission review, and a legal finding that revocation serves the public interest. This process takes, at minimum, 8 months. Marceline had fired a very loud gun that would not produce a bullet for a very long time. But it wasn't pointless. It was a distraction. While I was tracking the petition paperwork and coordinating with Beverlyn, Marceline was doing something else entirely. She was building a relationship with a man named Tuck Garrison. Tuck ran a small excavation and utility contracting business out of a gravel lot on Route 9. He had done some drainage work in Whitmore Terrace the previous fall, and Marceline had apparently been impressed enough by his willingness to work on short notice, and his apparent comfort operating in gray areas, to keep his number in her contacts. I didn't know about Tuck yet. I was focused on the county petition, which was exactly what Marceline wanted. Lesson 1. When someone is making a lot of noise in front of you, check what they're doing behind you. Summer arrived in Crestfield Falls the way it always does, all at once, like someone flipped a switch. One week it was 60 degrees and gray, the next it was 91, and the pavement was shimmering out by the old Route 9 grain elevator. Hospital air conditioning units ran around the clock. I spent most of June doing heat stress checks on the chillers and replacing a coolant coupling on Unit 3 that had been on my watch list since March. Marceline, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the county petition wasn't moving fast enough. She escalated to the city council. She submitted a written statement to the Crestfield Falls City Council's public comment docket, claiming that hospital-related traffic on Elderwood Lane was causing structural damage to residential roadways and significant quality of life degradation for homeowners. She attached photographs, and this part almost made me laugh out loud when I read it, of a pothole on Elderwood that had been there since the Obama administration and had absolutely nothing to do with hospital vehicles. The city council, to their credit, forwarded the complaint to Public Works, who sent an inspector, who documented that the pothole predated the current road surface and was consistent with standard freeze-thaw deterioration. The complaint went nowhere, but it had generated a paper trail. Marceline was building a record of grievances, and I recognized the pattern. She was setting up the narrative for something bigger. In the insurance compliance world, you don't just act, you document first. So the action looks inevitable when it finally comes. I started documenting too. I filed a formal records request with the HOA, which, under Ohio Revised Code Section 5312-10, requires an HOA to make financial records, meeting minutes, and governing documents available to any member in good standing within 10 business days. Tabitha was our member in good standing. We requested everything: all board meeting minutes for the past 3 years, all resolutions passed under Marceline's tenure, all vendor contracts, and the full financial ledger. The HOA responded 11 days later, 1 day over the legal limit, with a folder of documents that had clearly been curated. Several pages of meeting minutes were missing. 3 vendor contracts appeared as line items in the ledger, but were not included in the document packet. And HOA Resolution 23-04, the one targeting our easement, referenced a legal opinion from outside counsel that we were not provided. Beverlyn flagged this immediately. An HOA that fails to comply with records requests under ORC 5312.10 opens itself to statutory damages and court-ordered disclosure. She sent a second demand letter, this one with a compliance deadline and a notice that we were preserving our right to seek judicial remediation. Marceline fired back in the most petty way imaginable. She sent Tabitha a personal letter, not HOA letterhead, her personal stationery, cream-colored with a little embossed M in the corner, accusing Tabitha of creating a hostile environment within the community by using legal harassment to intimidate volunteer board members. She CC'd it to 3 of our neighbors. Tabitha read it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening. She set it down, took a sip of her coffee, and said very quietly, "She CC'd the Hendersons. Marge Henderson is going to absolutely hate this." She was right. Marge Henderson, who had lived on Elderwood Lane for 22 years, and who had the memory of a court reporter and the social awareness of someone who had watched every HOA drama on the street since before Marceline was even a concept, called Tabitha the next morning and spent 45 minutes explaining exactly which of Marceline's procedural actions over the past 3 years had been irregular, including the fact that 2 of the 4 votes on Resolution 23-04 had been cast by people Marceline had appointed to committees after the meeting was already noticed. Under the HOA's own bylaws, appointments made after a meeting notice was published couldn't be used to establish quorum or cast binding votes on items not originally on the agenda. Resolution 23-04 was procedurally invalid. We had just gotten a very important gift from the woman Marceline had tried to pressure into silence. I noted the time, 9:47 a.m. on a Monday. By 9:49, I had called Beverlyn, July 14th. I know the date because it's also my father's birthday, and I had a card sitting on my desk to mail after work. I got to the hospital at 6:45 a.m. to find the facilities manager for the night shift, a reliable man named Odell Graves, waiting for me in the parking lot with the kind of expression that tells you the overnight was not routine. The gravel in the lot crunched under my boots as I walked toward him, dry and sharp, the way it gets after a week without rain. "Water pressure dropped to 40% around 3 this morning," Odell said. "We ran diagnostics, thought it was the pressure regulator on line 2, spent 2 hours on it, then pressure started recovering on its own around 5:30. He handed me the overnight log. The pressure readings charted a very specific pattern. Gradual decline starting at 2:52 a.m., floor around 40% from 3:10 to 5:20 a.m., then recovery. Not the profile of a mechanical failure. Mechanical failures are sudden. This was deliberate and then abandoned. I walked the perimeter. Out by the service gate, Marceline's gate, the one she hated, the ground alongside the utility trench that ran parallel to the easement was disturbed. Fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt, the kind left by a backhoe or a small excavator. The grass at the trench edge had been pressed down and hadn't recovered. Someone had been digging, or had started digging, and stopped. I called the city utilities department at 7:15. I described what I'd found and requested an emergency inspection of the water main serving the hospital's east connection point. The inspector arrived by 9 a.m., an older gentleman named Walt, who smelled of burnt coffee and WD-40, and had the resigned competence of someone who has seen every kind of utility stupidity over a 40-year career. Walt spent 20 minutes with a ground-penetrating radar unit, and then straightened up and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as forensic. "Somebody dug down to your service connection," he said. "Didn't complete a cut, but they disturbed the backfill and made contact with the isolation valve housing. That's your pressure anomaly. They came back, realized they'd been heard or spotted, and refilled." I asked if it looked like city crew work. Walt laughed once, short and humorless. "City crew doesn't work at 3 in the morning on a random Wednesday without a work order, and this doesn't have a work order." I already knew who it was, but knowing and proving are two different currencies, and I needed the second one. I pulled every scrap of surveillance footage we had. The hospital has cameras on the parking lot and main entrance, but the service gate area has only one older unit that covers the gate itself, not the utility trench 10 meters to the south. The camera showed a set of headlights entering the far end of Elderwood Lane at 2:38 a.m. and not leaving its frame range, too far out to capture a plate. But the timestamp was right, and the vehicle profile matched a skid steer loader or small excavator on a flatbed trailer. I knew one man in Crestfield Falls who owned that kind of equipment and had a working relationship with my HOA board president. I did not confront Tuck Garrison, not yet. Instead, I made a call to the Ohio Utilities Protection Service, known as Ohio 811, and registered a formal complaint that an unpermitted excavation had occurred within the registered utility easement corridor, adjacent to Whitmore Community Hospital. Under Ohio law, any excavation within 18 inches of a registered utility line requires advance notification to the 811 system and issuance of a locate ticket. No locate ticket had been pulled. Ohio 811 violations carry civil penalties. The contractor is liable. The person who contracted the work, if evidence supports their direction of the unauthorized dig, can be held jointly liable. I also installed 2 new wireless cameras on the south perimeter fence that night. I aimed one at the utility trench. I aimed the other at the driveway of Tuck Garrison's access road on Route 9, which happened to be visible from the hospital's back property line on a clear day. The card for my father's birthday sat on my desk for another 3 days before I remembered to mail it. He called anyway, said happy birthday to himself, and asked me how work was going. "Interesting," I told him. He knew that tone. "Be careful," he said. "I'm past careful," I said. I met methodical. The HOA financial records arrived. All of them, this time, after Beverlin's second demand letter, on a Thursday afternoon in a manila envelope that Tabitha signed for at the door. I spread everything across the kitchen table that evening, while the window AC unit hummed and the last of the summer daylight turned the oak trees outside into something that looked almost serene. I found it on page 47 of the ledger. There was a line item, dated 9 months prior, for $15,000 paid to GRS Environmental and Utility Consulting, LLC. No description beyond that, no contract in the document packet. When I cross-referenced the Ohio Secretary of State Business Registry, GRS Environmental and Utility Consulting, LLC, had been registered 7 months before the payment, with one listed principal, Tuck Garrison. HOA dues money paid by Tabitha and every other homeowner on Elderwood Lane, had been used to pay a contractor who then, I was now nearly certain, had attempted an unauthorized excavation of a hospital water main in the middle of the night. And that payment had been approved by the board, which at the time of approval had been composed entirely of Marceline's appointees. But it got better. The HOA's governing documents, specifically Article 7, Section 4 of the Whitmore Terrace CC and RS, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that run with every property deed in the neighborhood, contain a provision requiring that any contract over $5,000 be approved by a membership vote, not just a board vote. No membership vote had been held for the GRS payment. That provision is not a suggestion. Under Ohio Condominium and Homeowners Association law, expenditures that violate the C, and Rs can be recovered from the board members who authorize them personally, not just from the association's general funds. If board members authorized a contract that was then used to fund what amounted to utility sabotage, the legal exposure wasn't just civil, it was potentially criminal under Ohio Revised Code Section 290908. Which covers tampering with utilities and carries felony-level penalties for actions that endanger public health or safety. A hospital losing 40% water pressure is not an abstract risk. Surgical suites require uninterrupted water. Dialysis units require it. Sterilization equipment requires it. 73 patients were in-house the night of the pressure drop. If whoever was at that trench had completed the cut instead of retreating, I sat with that thought for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Tabitha came in from the back porch, looked at my face, and sat down across from me. "What did you find?" she asked. I showed her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, she paid him with our money. Our money. The Hendersons' money. The Okafor family's money. Everybody's money. Tabitha folded her hands on the table. "What do we do?" I looked at the ledger. I looked at the CC and RS. I looked at the Ohio 811 violation I'd already filed, and the camera footage I'd already preserved. "We build the case," I said, and then we let her finish it herself. The next 6 weeks were the quietest and most productive of my professional life. I started by going back to Beverlyn with everything: the GRS payment, the CC&R violation, the Ohio 811 complaint, the camera footage, the soil disturbance documentation, Walt's informal inspection notes. Beverlyn spread it across her conference table in the methodical way of someone who is already drafting the first filing in her head. And when she looked up, she said, simply, "This is more than a civil matter." She was right. We needed a second player. I contacted the Crestfield Falls Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, not to make accusations yet, but to make what's called a courtesy notification, a documented statement that a potential criminal matter may be developing, and that the notifying party is preserving evidence. This move does two things. It timestamps your cooperation with law enforcement before any formal investigation begins, and it makes it very difficult for anyone to later claim you sat on evidence. Smart move courtesy of Beverlyn's 32 years of experience. File it and forget it until you need it. At the hospital, I quietly began hardening the infrastructure. I submitted a capital expenditure request for a backup water storage bladder system, essentially a large, pressurized reserve tank that would maintain surgical and dialysis water supply for up to 6 hours in the event of a main connection interruption. This was a legitimate facilities upgrade I'd been wanting to push through for 2 years. Marceline's little nighttime adventure had just made the case for me. The board approved it in 2 weeks. I also coordinated with the City Utilities Department to install a tamper detection sensor on the hospital's main isolation valve, a device that would alert my facilities pager and the city's emergency line simultaneously if the valve housing was disturbed. The sensor cost $800 and took 1 afternoon to install. It was, in hindsight, the single most important physical component of everything that followed. Meanwhile, I was building allies. Marge Henderson was already on our side, and her memory, that extraordinary institutional memory of 22 years on Elderwood Lane, was proving invaluable. She recalled that 3 years ago, before Marceline, the HOA had been considering a community garden project on a common area lot at the north end of the street. The project had been tabled when the old board's treasurer resigned. Marceline had inherited it and simply never revived it. Marge had the original proposal, the donor pledges from local nurseries, and the contact information for the landscape architect who had volunteered her services. I filed that information in a folder I labeled After. The Okafor family, the ones Marceline had fined over the basketball hoop in the driveway, had never actually paid that fine. They had challenged it on the grounds that the HOA's signage ordinance, under which the fine was issued, had not been properly adopted under the required notice and comment period outlined in the CC and Rs. They were right, and the fine had quietly lapsed. But they had a folder of their own documentation, and when Tabitha sat down with Adeze Okafor over iced tea on the back porch one evening, that folder changed hands. The Delacroix couple had kept every one of Marceline's noise complaint letters, 3 years' worth, in a shoebox. When I explained what we were building, Bernard Delacroix handed over that shoebox without hesitation, and then went inside and came back with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. "I've been waiting," he said, "for someone with a plan." By mid-August, I had signed statements from 4 separate households, documented HOA procedural violations going back 31 months, 2 separate legal theories of recovery, an active Ohio 811 complaint, a tamper detection sensor on the water main, and 2 cameras aimed at the right places. What I needed now was for Marceline to make one more move, a big one, the kind that creates a public record. I didn't have to wait long. Marceline found out about the Ohio 811 complaint in the second week of August. I don't know exactly how. My best guess is that Tuck Garrison received the civil violation notice and panicked, and panicking men make phone calls. Whatever the source, she clearly understood that the complaint pointed directly at her, because her behavior in the days that followed had the particular quality of someone who has decided that the best defense is a conflagration. She started with the smear. An anonymous post appeared on the Whitmore Terrace neighborhood social media page, the kind of community forum where people announce lost cats and debate parking etiquette, claiming that a hospital employee living on Elderwood Lane had been diverting HOA resources for personal benefit and intimidating board members. No names, but the description was specific enough that anyone who knew the neighborhood would know it was directed at me and Tabitha. The post had 17 comments within 4 hours, mostly confusion and a few people asking for clarification. Marge Henderson posted a reply that was, I am told, absolutely surgical. She listed, by date and resolution number, 8 separate HOA actions taken under Marceline's board that had procedural irregularities. She attached the relevant CC and R sections. She was polite about it in the way that a scalpel is polite, precise and completely without mercy. The anonymous post was deleted within the hour. Marceline then tried the bribery angle, though bribery might be too strong a word. She approached the Delacroix family and offered to forgive all 3 years of noise complaint fines, which, as previously established, had no legal force anyway, in exchange for their neutrality in any upcoming HOA proceedings. Bernard Delacroix listened to her entire proposal, thanked her politely, and then called me from his front porch before she'd made it back to her car. What she didn't know was that Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings. Bernard's phone had been recording the entire conversation. The sabotage attempt came on August 19th. At 2:14 a.m., my facilities pager went off with the tamper detection alert. Someone had activated the sensor on the water main isolation valve. Simultaneously, the new camera on the south perimeter captured a vehicle, a white flatbed truck, plate clearly visible in the infrared, pulling up alongside the utility easement. One figure exited, approached the trench area, and then froze, looked directly at the new camera housing, which I had mounted at an angle he clearly hadn't anticipated. He was back in the truck in 90 seconds. The truck was gone in 3 minutes. I was already dressed and out the door by 2:20 a.m. I drove to the hospital, photographed the disturbed ground around the valve housing, verified that the physical valve was intact, and then sat in my car for a moment, listening to the night settle back into itself. Crickets. The distant rumble of a freight train on the Route 9 crossing. The dry leaf smell of late August in Ohio, a little smoky from somewhere distant. I sent the footage to Beverlyn at 2:47 a.m. with one line. Second attempt. Plate visible. Ready to move. Her response came at 6:02 a.m. I'll call the DA's office when it opens. Here's the thing about tamper detection sensors and infrared cameras. They don't feel like a trap while you're installing them. They feel like precaution. The trap part only becomes visible in retrospect, when you realize that every escalation your opponent made after the sensors went in was being recorded, time-stamped, and preserved by systems she didn't know existed. Every attempt to cover her tracks had created more tracks. By the morning of August 20th, I had everything I needed. I just needed one last public moment to bring all of it into the light. Fortunately, Marceline had already scheduled one. The Whitmore Terrace HOA annual meeting was scheduled for August 26th, a date Marceline had set back in June, when she was apparently planning to use it to push through a formal renewal of her board presidency, and a new resolution package that included, among other things, a community infrastructure assessment fee of $300 per household. She had noticed the meeting in the required manner, posted the agenda on the community board at the Whitmore Terrace mailbox cluster, and sent the required written notice to all members. What she had not planned for was what the meeting would become. I spent the week before August 26th in a state of focused calm that Tabitha later described as, honestly, a little unsettling. I was sleeping fine. I was eating well. I was going to work every day and doing my job. I was also in my off hours constructing a presentation. Not a retaliatory document, not an accusation, a factual exhibit packet. 31 pages, organized chronologically, containing the complete HOA financial ledger with the GRS payment highlighted and cross-referenced to the Ohio Secretary of State registration showing Tuck Garrison as principal. The CC and R provision requiring membership vote for expenditures over $5,000, the Ohio 811 violation notice, the tamper detection logs from both incidents, the camera footage stills with timestamps, Walt the inspector's signed statement describing the unauthorized excavation evidence, Bernard Delacroix's audio recording of Marceline's neutrality offer, and the signed statements from 4 households documenting procedural violations. Beverlyn reviewed it and said, "This is a DA's filing, not an HOA presentation." "Good," I said. "I want the DA to see it too." She had, in fact, already been in contact with the Harwich County District Attorney's Office. The assistant DA assigned to the matter had reviewed the Ohio 811 complaint, the footage, and the financial irregularities, and had issued a target letter to Tuck Garrison, a formal notification that he was the subject of a criminal investigation. Garrison, as predicted, had immediately hired an attorney and indicated his willingness to cooperate. A cooperating witness. In the days before the meeting, I also reached out to 2 journalists, a reporter at the Crestfield Falls Courier-Ledger, a hyper-local paper that covered municipal and community affairs with real rigor, and a correspondent from the regional TV affiliate who had done a segment on HOA abuse cases 6 months prior. I gave each of them the same thing, a sealed envelope marked embargoed until August 26th, 7 p.m. Inside each envelope was a summary of the financial irregularities and the utility tampering allegations, with a note that a public HOA meeting would be held that evening, at which new information would be presented. I invited 3 additional neighbors who had expressed concerns about Marceline's tenure: the Hendersons, the Okafors, and a retired postal worker named Clement Brassard, who had lived on Elderwood for 30 years, and who had once told me, with quiet certainty, "That woman is going to cost this neighborhood something it can't get back." On the evening of August 25th, I drove past the community room where the meeting would be held the following night. The parking lot was empty, the lights off. I sat there for a moment in the dark, the engine idling. I thought about the 73 patients who had been in the hospital the night of that first pressure drop. I thought about the dialysis ward on the 2nd floor. I thought about Tabitha's patients on the 3rd floor, and the IV lines, and the sterilization equipment, and all the invisible infrastructure that keeps people alive when they're most vulnerable. Then I drove home, had dinner, and went to bed at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow was a meeting. August 26th arrived with the particular cruelty of late summer Ohio. 93 degrees by 2 p.m., still and humid in the way that makes the air feel like a warm, wet towel draped over everything. The community room's window. SC units were running hard, and by the time the meeting started at 7 p.m., the room smelled of overworked motors and cheap folding chairs, and the anticipatory anxiety of about 45 people who had all heard rumors but weren't sure about the specifics. The room held more people than it was designed for. Every HOA member who had received notice had apparently decided to show up. Marceline, at the front table, looked pleased by this. Attendance validated her. The 2 journalists were in the back row with notebooks. Clement Brassard was 3 seats from the aisle, arms folded, expression unreadable. Marge Henderson sat directly across from Marceline's table with a printed copy of the CC and Rs on her lap. The Okafors were in the 2nd row. Bernard Delacroix was near the door, with his phone visible on his knee, screen dark. Detective Lori Fenn of the Crestfield Falls PD, Financial Crimes Unit, was standing in the parking lot outside, by prior arrangement with me, ready to enter when I sent a text. Marceline opened the meeting with her usual procedural authority. She announced the agenda: board renewal vote, the new assessment fee, and miscellaneous business. She was moving efficiently, clearly planning to push through the renewal before any discussion could develop. She called for the first agenda item. "Point of order," said Tabitha. The room went very quiet. Marceline looked at Tabitha with the expression of someone who has rehearsed for objections, but finds the specific objection before her unexpected. "Member Reese, this is not the comment period. Point of order precedes the agenda," Tabitha said. "Under Article 3, Section 7 of our CC and Rs, I'd like to introduce new business before the vote proceeds, on the grounds that relevant financial information affecting the board's composition has not been disclosed to the membership." She looked at me. I stood up. I had brought 45 copies of the exhibit packet. I had a volunteer, Clement Brassard, who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had sorted mail for 30 years, passed them down every row simultaneously. 45 hands received 45 packets at nearly the same moment. The sound of 45 sets of pages being turned is surprisingly loud in a small room. I kept my voice level. I explained, in plain language, the following: that the HOA had paid $15,000 from member dues to a contractor without the required membership vote, that this same contractor was the subject of an Ohio 811 civil violation related to unauthorized excavation of a hospital utility line, that the excavation had caused a verifiable pressure drop that affected patient care infrastructure, that a second attempt had been recorded on camera 11 days ago, and that the Harwich County DA's office had issued a target letter to the contractor in question, who was now cooperating with investigators. I said the contractor's name. I said the amount. I said the date. Then I sat down. The room did not erupt. It went quiet in a specific way. The way a room goes quiet when people are reading something that changes what they thought they knew. Pages turned. Someone near the back said quietly, "Oh my God." Someone else said Marceline's name in a tone that was not a question. Marceline stood up. She said that the documents were fabricated and that I was conducting a harassment campaign and that she would be pursuing legal action against me and my wife. She said it with the authority of someone who had talked her way out of things before. The room was not listening the way it used to listen. Marge Henderson raised her hand and read aloud, in full, Article 7, Section 4 of the CC&RS, every word. Then she asked, directly, which board members had approved the GRS payment and whether they could show her the membership vote authorization. No one at the board table answered. I sent the text to Detective Fenn at 7:47 p.m. She entered through the side door, introduced herself, and stated that she was present to serve a notice of investigation on Marceline Yvonne Pruitt regarding allegations of fraudulent misappropriation of association funds and conspiracy to commit utility tampering under Ohio Revised Code. She asked Marceline to step outside. Marceline left the room under her own power, which I'll give her. She walked. She didn't run. But the linen blazer had a sweat stain on the back by then, and the lanyard full of committee badges swung with every step like something that had lost its meaning. The room exhaled. Someone started clapping. I want to say it was a dramatic swell of applause, but it was actually just the Delacroix couple and Clement Brassard, which somehow felt more appropriate. The legal aftermath moved the way legal things do, slowly, then in concentrated bursts. Tuck Garrison entered a plea agreement with the Harwich County DA's office in October, pleading to a single count of unauthorized excavation of a registered utility line and a civil consent decree covering the Ohio 811 violation. He paid a fine, surrendered his contractor's license for 18 months, and provided a sworn statement confirming that Marceline Pruitt had hired him, paid him with HOA funds, and directed him to disable or disrupt the hospital service connection on 2 separate occasions. That statement was the linchpin. Marceline was charged with fraudulent misappropriation of association funds, a 5th-degree felony under Ohio law for amounts over $1,000, and with conspiracy to commit utility tampering. She negotiated a plea in February of the following year, a suspended sentence, restitution of the full $15,000, plus legal fees to the HOA membership, a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of any homeowners or condominium association in Ohio, and 500 hours of community service. The HOA held a special election in November. A retired civil engineer named Harlan Voss ran for board president on a single-platform campaign: transparent governance and no nonsense. He won with 81% of the vote. The Hendersons and the Okafors joined the board. The noise complaint files were reviewed and dismissed. The basketball hoop on the Okafor driveway is still there, and it's still used, and nobody has said a word about it. Beverlyn Cho billed me for 80 hours of legal work, then discounted it by 40% because, as she put it, this one was interesting. I've referred 3 people to her since. The hospital's backup water storage system came online in December. I presented the installation at the State Hospital Facilities Directors Conference in Columbus the following spring, and 3 other regional hospitals have since requested the technical specs. Walt the inspector came to the ribbon cutting, if you can call capping a 400-gallon reserve bladder system a ribbon cutting, and brought coffee and donuts, which felt exactly right. The community garden on the North Common area lot broke ground in April. Marge Henderson chaired the planning committee. The landscape architect who had volunteered 3 years earlier came back and donated 2 weekends of her time. By June, there were raised beds growing tomatoes, kale, and more zucchini than any neighborhood should reasonably possess. A small section was set aside for a sensory garden, accessible to residents with mobility aids. Tabitha's suggestion, made at the second planning meeting while she was still in her scrubs, at 8 p.m. on a Thursday. The Whitmore Terrace Community Scholarship Fund was established in September with the restitution funds, after the HOA membership voted to direct the recovered money towards something permanent. First award, $2,000 to a graduating senior pursuing a degree in nursing, healthcare administration, or public infrastructure. The Okafor family's eldest daughter applied and received it. She starts her nursing program this fall. I still walk to work most mornings when the weather allows. The oak trees on Elderwood Lane are still there, still creaking in the wind, still dropping their leaves in that particular pattern that means October has arrived, whether you're ready or not. The service gate at the hospital is still gray, still unremarkable, still exactly what it was always supposed to be. Some mornings I walk past the south perimeter fence and glance at the spot where the utility trench runs. The ground is level now, the grass grew back, but the cameras are still there.
Marceline Booth pled guilty in February. $15,000 in restitution, a lifetime ban from every HOA board in Ohio, 500 hours of community service, paid for with the evidence she left behind herself. Here's what I want you to take from this. Devin didn't win because he got lucky. It was because when she made her move, he didn't react. He documented. He fight. He waited. Every illegal cut she made become paper trail. Every emergency protocol she triggered become a weapon he owned. That's not revenge. That's preparation meeting opportunity. The money she stole, it funded a scholarship for a nursing student on the street. First awards go out this fall. She tried to remove a hospital from a neighborhood. The neighborhood used her own money to build something that lasts. If you ever stood in front of a board that had all power and none of the accountability, you know exactly how Devin felt at that train at 3 a.m. The difference between him and most people, he knew the rules better than she did. He was willing to wait. It is one hit close to home. Drop your HOA story below and read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next one coming makes this look like a warm-up. And remember, petty power always leaves a paper trail. You just have to know where to look.